She walked into the viper's nest of Sterling Corporation, her simple gray suit a quiet whisper in a room screaming with designer labels. The interview panel, a duo of corporate predators radiating arrogance, sneered at her background in community work. "This is a multinational conglomerate, Ms. Vance, not a charity drive," one of them scoffed, tossing her single-page resume onto the polished table as if it were garbage. "Frankly, you're wasting our time. You don't belong here." Humiliated, but unbroken, Ilara met their disdain with a quiet, unreadable calm, her silence a shield for the secret that was about to bring their world crashing down. Moments later, the firm's legendary founder would burst into the room, bow his head, and speak the two words that would shatter their reality forever. Chairwoman Vance. But before that moment of stunning vindication came the trial by fire. The lobby of Sterling Corporation was a cathedral of modern commerce, a silent, cavernous space of polished marble floors and towering glass walls that reflected the cold, indifferent sky. Here, ambition was a tangible presence. The candidates waiting for their interviews were living embodiments of this ambition, dressed in impeccably tailored suits, their expensive watches catching the light. They were a flock of sleek, predatory birds, each one poised and confident. And then there was Ilara Vance. She sat slightly apart, a quiet island in a sea of restless energy. In her lap, her hands rested on a plain canvas tote bag. The other candidates noticed her, of course. Their glances were brief, but laden with a shared, silent judgment. Ilara was an anomaly. She did not fit. This story is about what happens when the world judges a book by its worn cover, only to discover the story inside can change everything. If you believe in the power of quiet strength, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss the end of this. When a receptionist with a voice as crisp as a new banknote called her name, the sound seemed to echo the room's collective condescension. Ilara stood, her movements unhurried, and followed the woman down a long, white corridor. The interview room was just as imposing. A vast mahogany table dominated the space, its surface so polished it reflected the grim, focused faces of the two people who sat waiting for her. On the left was Marcus Thorne, the head of human resources, a man who looked like he had been assembled from a catalog of corporate success. On the right sat Victoria Sterling, the CEO's daughter, and a senior executive who possessed a brittle beauty and an air of profound boredom. They did not stand. Marcus gestured to the solitary chair opposite them. "Ms. Vance, have a seat." Victoria picked up a thin file. "Ilara Vance," she read, drawing out the name as if it tasted strange. "It says here you have a background in community project management and some freelance consulting for nonprofits. Not exactly the typical path to a senior strategy position at a global conglomerate like Sterling." Her voice was laced with a delicate, almost artistic brand of scorn. Marcus leaned forward. "We typically recruit from the top business schools. Your resume is unconventional. What made you believe you were qualified for this role?" Ilara's gaze remained steady. She didn't offer excuses or try to embellish her past. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but clear, filling the silent room with an unexpected resonance. "I believe strategy is about understanding people," she began, her words simple and direct. "It's about identifying a core need and finding the most efficient, humane way to meet it. Whether you are building a community center in a forgotten neighborhood or restructuring a multinational supply chain, the fundamental principle is the same. You must see the structure, but you must never lose sight of the people within it." Her answer was so devoid of the usual corporate jargon, so plain and earnest, that it seemed to stun them into a brief silence. It was not the answer they had expected. Victoria recovered first, a thin, patronizing smile playing on her lips. "How very idealistic, Ms. Vance. But here in the real world, we deal with profit margins, shareholder value, and aggressive market expansion, not humane efficiency." She said the last two words as if they were a quaint, ridiculous notion. Marcus chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He picked up his own pen, a gleaming silver instrument, and tapped it against her resume, leaving a small, sharp indent. "Let's be blunt. Sterling Corporation is a shark tank. You need to be a shark to survive. Looking at this?" He gestured dismissively. "At her resume, you seem more like a minnow." The insult was blatant, stripped of all pretense of professional courtesy. They were testing her, pushing her, enjoying the power they held over this plainly dressed woman who had dared to enter their domain. They watched her, expecting a flush of anger or the sting of tears. They wanted to see her crumble. But Ilara did not crumble. A flicker of something passed through her eyes. Not hurt, but a profound, almost sad understanding. She was seeing them for exactly who they were. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Sharks are powerful," she conceded, her tone even, "but they are also predictable. They are driven by a single relentless instinct. A good strategist must see the whole ocean, not just the blood in the water." The quiet dignity of her response was, to them, an act of defiance. It infuriated them. Who was this woman with her simple clothes and her charity work background to lecture them on strategy? Victoria leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "Let's try a hypothetical then. A real-world problem. Our European division is underperforming by 12%. We have 1,000 employees in our Frankfurt office with high overheads. The board is demanding a swift and decisive turnaround. What is your humane solution, Ms. Vance?" It was a trap. The correct answer, in their world, was obvious. Mass layoffs, aggressive cost-cutting, a brutal display of corporate strength. It was the shark's answer. They waited, their expressions smug, certain they had finally cornered her. Ilara paused, her gaze turning inward for a moment. She wasn't thinking about spreadsheets or profit and loss statements. She was thinking about 1,000 people in Frankfurt, 1,000 families, 1,000 lives connected to a single decision made in a room just like this one. "I would go to Frankfurt," she said at last. The simplicity of the statement was, once again, jarring. "What? For a visit?" Marcus scoffed. "We don't have time for field trips." "Not for a visit," Ilara corrected him gently. "I would go there to listen. I would talk to the warehouse workers, the sales team, the junior accountants, the ones who live the company's problems every single day. The solution to a 12% deficit isn't hidden in a boardroom in another country. It's in the quiet frustrations and brilliant, unheard ideas of the people on the ground. A leader's job isn't to have all the answers. It's to create a space where the right answers can be heard." Her words painted a picture so fundamentally at odds with their entire world view that they could only stare at her with a mixture of disbelief and contempt. Victoria let out a short, sharp laugh. "That's your grand strategy? A listening tour? Ms. Vance, you are hopelessly naive. This has been an interesting, if fruitless, exercise. Thank you for your time. The receptionist will validate your parking." She stood up, a clear dismissal. Marcus pushed his chair back, already looking toward the door, his mind on the next, more promising candidate. They had broken her, they thought. They had exposed her simplistic, idealistic notions for what they were, and were now casting her out. The air in the room grew heavy with the finality of their judgment. Marcus and Victoria were already mentally moving on, their expressions a mixture of impatience and smug satisfaction. For them, the interview was over. Another box ticked, another unsuitable candidate weeded out. Ilara remained seated for a moment, a pool of stillness in the wake of their abrupt dismissal. There was no anger on her face, no sign of defeat. Instead, there was a quiet solemnity, the look of someone who had seen exactly what she had come to see. She reached down and picked up her canvas tote bag, her movements deliberate and graceful. She stood, her simple gray suit seeming to hold more dignity than their expensive fashionable attire ever could. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice even, betraying no emotion. It was a mirror of their own words, yet from her it sounded not like a dismissal, but like a verdict. She turned to leave, her hand on the cold steel handle of the door. And in that precise moment the door swung inward. Standing in the doorway was a man in his late 60s, his hair a distinguished silver, his presence radiating an effortless, unshakable authority that made Marcus and Victoria's performative power seem cheap and theatrical. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, but unlike theirs, it was not a costume. It was simply a part of him. It was James Sterling, the founder and CEO of Sterling Corporation. Marcus and Victoria froze. Their carefully constructed masks of arrogance shattered in an instant, replaced by fawning, nervous shock. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus stammered, his voice suddenly an octave higher. He smoothed down his tie, a useless, reflexive gesture. We weren't expecting you. Is everything all right?" Victoria, for the first time, looked flustered. A splotch of red appeared on her neck. "Father, what are you doing here? We were just finishing up." James Sterling's eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept over the room. They took in the arrogant posture of Marcus Thorne, the dismissive expression still lingering on his daughter's face, and the lone, solitary figure of Ilara Vance standing by the door. He ignored his daughter and his head of HR completely. His entire focus, his entire being, seemed to zero in on Ilara. The tension in the room became a physical thing, a thick, unbreathable atmosphere. Marcus and Victoria exchanged a look of utter confusion. Why was the CEO staring at the charity worker? A slow, dawning dread began to creep into their faces as James Sterling took a step into the room, his movements filled with a deference that was utterly alien to them. He walked past them as if they were nothing more than furniture and stopped directly in front of Ilara. He inclined his head, a gesture of profound respect. The silence was absolute. Then he spoke, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the stunned silence like a diamond through glass. "Chairwoman Vance." The two words landed with the force of a physical blow. "Chairwoman Vance." The title echoed in the sterile, silent room, dismantling reality as Marcus and Victoria knew it. Their minds struggled to connect the woman in the cheap gray suit, the minnow they had just gleefully humiliated, with that single, cataclysmic word. A wave of nausea washed over Marcus. Victoria stumbled back a half step, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that was just beginning to bloom. James Sterling continued, his tone one of genuine apology, directed only at Ilara. "I am so sorry for my delay. My flight was held up on the tarmac. I trust my team has been accommodating while you waited?" He looked from Ilara to his daughter and Marcus, and for the first time they saw not a father or a boss, but a deeply disappointed and furious leader. Ilara slowly turned her head, her calm gaze falling upon the two frozen figures. A long moment passed. Then she spoke, her voice still quiet, yet now it carried the weight of an entire corporation. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "your team has been very illuminating." The word hung in the air between them, a perfectly chosen, double-edged sword. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, and it was the most damning sentence they had ever heard. The aftermath of that single devastating word, "chairwoman," was a silent explosion that ripped through the fabric of the room. The color drained from Marcus Thorne's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. The smug confidence that had been his armor just moments before had evaporated, revealing the terrified, ambitious man beneath. His mouth hung slightly open, as if he wanted to speak but had forgotten how. Victoria Sterling, who had spent her entire life wrapped in the protective cocoon of her name and status, looked as if the floor had dissolved beneath her feet. The look in her eyes was one of pure, unadulterated panic. She was seeing not just the unimpressive candidate, but the ultimate authority of the entire company, a woman she had personally mocked and dismissed with relish. She had not just been rude, she had committed an act of corporate suicide. Ilara Vance watched them, her expression unchanging. Her silence was more powerful than any tirade could have been. In it, they saw their own arrogance, Their own cruelty, their own catastrophic misjudgment reflected back at them. James Sterling's gaze hardened as he finally turned to face his daughter and his top executive. The warmth and respect he had shown Ilara vanished, replaced by a glacial fury that was terrifying in its stillness. "My office," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Both of you, now. Do not speak to anyone. Do not touch your computers. Just go to my office and wait for me." It was not a request. It was the pronouncement of a sentence. Without another word, moving like automatons in a nightmare, Marcus and Victoria turned and shuffled out of the room. They didn't look at each other. They didn't look back. They were ghosts, already erased from the world they had so confidently inhabited. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, leaving a profound silence in its wake. James Sterling's demeanor softened instantly as he turned back to Ilara. "Chairwoman, I am deeply, profoundly sorry. This is not the Sterling Corporation I built. This is a rot I failed to see." "You see it now, James," Ilara said, her tone not unkind. "That is what matters." She looked at him, and for the first time, a small, weary smile touched her lips. "This is why I came like this. A name on a memo, a formal introduction. That shows you nothing. To see the true character of a house, you don't enter through the grand ballroom. You knock on the back door." He nodded, understanding completely. "The board is assembled and waiting for your assessment of the company's cultural health." He offered her his arm, a gesture of old-world courtesy and profound respect. "Shall we?" "We shall," Ilara replied. Together they walked out of the interview room, leaving the empty chairs and the polished table behind like relics of a fallen regime. They walked down the long, white corridor, their footsteps echoing in the silence. As they approached the main lobby, the remaining candidates, still waiting nervously, looked up. They saw the simple woman from before, the one they had dismissed with their superior smirks. But now she was on the arm of the legendary James Sterling, who was leaning in, listening to her with rapt attention. A wave of confusion and awe rippled through the waiting area. Perceptions shattered and rearranged themselves in real time. The woman in the plain gray suit was not an outsider. She was the center. In the grand boardroom on the top floor, the members of the board, a collection of the most powerful men and women in the industry, rose to their feet as one when Ilara Vance entered. She walked to the head of the vast table and took her seat. From this vantage point, she could see the entire city spread out below, a kingdom of glass and steel. She was no longer just Ilara Vance, the quiet observer. She was Chairwoman Vance, the architect of its future. She looked at the faces around the table and then began to speak, her voice calm, clear, and imbued with an unshakable authority. "Good morning, everyone," she began. "I have spent the morning assessing the health of our foundation, not the financial foundation, which remains strong, but the human foundation, the character of our company, and I must report, I have found a crack." The room was silent, every person hanging on her next words, knowing that the fate of Sterling Corporation was about to be reshaped by the quiet woman they had appointed to lead them. The woman who understood that true worth is never loud, and true power needs no adornment.